guys. So for video number 3, we are going to look at science. Alright, so I'm kind of coming back to that key concept 1.1 that we looked at back with the Renaissance. And the worldview of European intellectuals shifted from one based off of ecclesiastical and classical authority to one based primarily off of inquiry and observation of the natural world. So we kind of talked about how that's going to change with humanism and how people will look at humanity and art, but that's also going to talk about how things change with science as well. So today we're going to look at science and art, because, you know, science and art gotta go hand in hand. So our first scientist that we're going to look at is Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon is going to be English during the Elizabethan era, and he is going to have this idea of inductive reasoning, so learning through observing things in nature. Versus Rene Descartes is going to say that that's not good enough. I'm going to be the first rationalist, and I need to do things through hands-on, tangible, experimental kind of methods. And he's famous because he has this quote, I think, therefore I am. Wow, like, what a deep quote. We're also going to see, like I mentioned in the other video, we're going to see Nicholas Copernicus. So he's going to challenge Ptolemy's theory way back in Egypt, way back when he said that Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus is going to come forward and is going to say that no, it is going to be a heliocentric point of view. Johannes Kepler is going to say, like, hey, the planets don't orbit in perfect circles, they orbit in ellipticals, which is why we have like different seasons and how that affects the weather patterns. And then of course we have Galileo Galilei and his assertions of reaffirming that the sun is in fact the center of the universe, and his things that he's finding out with all of his new inventions and the telescope. And that's something that I like to keep in mind, is Galileo and Galilei is the telescope. We're also going to see a great increase in medical knowledge, which is good because it helps keep people alive longer. Okay, so the first person is going to be Andreas Vesalius, and he is going to start putting out more modern depictions of anatomy. So medieval knowledge of anatomy is not the best. They didn't really understand where things happened and where things come from, and you know, we're going to start to see some more hands-on drawings and depictions of how things work. Paracelsus is going to have this new observation of nature, toxicology, how do drugs affect and how do substances affect the body. And then William Harvey is going to be the first person to understand the circulatory system and how our blood pumps and goes around in our body. So as long as you can really remember those scientific names and how the church reacted to science. And so you could definitely make a point for, like, if they were to give you an argumentative essay, you could definitely make a point that the church did not appreciate this view of rationalism, because this view of rationalism is saying that there's not a God. But then you could also use the idea of science, that science was used to prove God's existence. So it sort of depends on which documents they give you, or for an LEQ, you have to pick one point of view, but you could definitely argue for scientific research one way or another. And so the second half of this video is going to be all about art. And so I'm going to pass out in class just an overview of kind of how art works. And as far as like the timeline, art is a little funky because it like overlaps, and it's a little difficult to understand, like, why is this art important? But you also have to keep in mind, like, who painted it, for what purpose. You have to think about who's in the picture. Why did they paint them this way? So if I'm painting a king, but I make him look trash, that's obviously saying something about the way that I believe about this king, right? So first things first, that's going to be your Italian Renaissance. When we think about the Italian Renaissance, we're going to be thinking about our 1350 to 1550. You know, your Michelangelo, your Raphael, your Da Vinci, your Donatello. Our writers are going to be Petrarch and Machiavelli, and that's going to be that increase in individualism and humanism. Lots of sculptures, lots of architecture. That's going to be something that's important. For our Northern Renaissance, which is next, it's going to be 1450 to 1700. That's going to kind of be more religiously based with humanism, but also it's going to be more based off of the Protestant Reformation, because that's really, really centered in Germany mostly. Thinking about what are some of those Dutch painters that we remember, right? We have Van Eyck, we have Rembrandt, we have Thomas More, William Shakespeare. All these people are going to be part of that Northern Renaissance movement. The next section is going to be Mannerism, and that's going to be El Greco is going to be one of those painters in the Mannerism period, and he's just going to be transitioning from the Renaissance into the Baroque period, so that 1520 to 1600 range. Up next we have Baroque, and Baroque is going to be big and bad and bold and fancy, okay? So we kind of think about overdoing it to make this big reaction, and so your composers are going to be Bach and Handel, and your writers are going to be Copernicus and Galileo, and all those science things are going to kind of be building into the Baroque period. So that time period is going to be around 1550 to 1750. And then on the back half of that, from 1710 to 1790 is going to be the Rococo period. And that's going to be a lot lighter. It's going to be less formal as we're starting to move towards the Enlightenment. You're going to see Rousseau, Diderot, Edmund Burke, Montesquieu, Adam Smith, Voltaire. Those kind of writers are going to be part of that Rococo movement. Mozart, and you're going to see a lot of just French painters specifically. The next section is going to be 1790 to the 1820s, and that's going to be your neoclassical period. And so this is going to be this style of the Enlightenment and a reflection of we don't need this excessiveness that comes from the Rococo period. And so it's going to be a lot more simplistic with Stravinsky, and you're going to see some French painters. You're going to see Jacques-Louis David. You're going to be thinking about this is the time period of the French Revolution. So we're kind of moving into that range of, we're starting to get a nationalism. 1820s to 1860s is going to be your Romantic period. And of course, it's going to be very nationalistic, very emotional. You're going to see things like Chopin and Strauss as far as your music. Let's see, you're going to see Lord Byron, you're going to see Victor Hugo, William Wordsworth, Sir Walter Scott. You're going to see Shelley as a writer. There's writing some very dramatic fiction, some very romantic fiction. And of course, with anything in history, there's always going to be, to any action, there's always going to be a counter reaction, and that's going to be your realism. So it's not necessarily, it's taking that romantic idea of like, oh, the world, and it's like, no, this is the harsh, common reality of the common man, and how the common man is going to be painted. It's still pretty positive, but at the same time, it's going to be kind of getting into the industrial era and how life is not always that great for the peasants. The next era is going to be Impressionism, and that is 1870s to 1920s, and that is where we're going to start to see a new way of looking at the world, everyday life for everyday people. You're going to start to see, let's see, what are some big fancy names that we can do? Van Gogh is going to be in that time period. Monet is going to be in that time period. Pissarro is going to be in that time period. Renoir. All these famous painters are going to be Impressionism. And that's going to go right up until the 1920s. From the 1920s until modern day, it's pretty much just modern art and postmodernism art. And there's two different kind of ideas that are in modern art. There's going to be the romantic, whimsical dreams of all that the world can be in that positive light. But then on the other side, you're also going to see a lot of stark reality with technology and the things that are really, really bad in the world, especially when you get into like World War II and Vietnam and everything that the world, the Cold War, everything that could be bad in the world is also going to be depicted. With Pablo Picasso, Andy Warhol are going to be some really big names for the painters of the modern and the postmodernism time period. Okay, so that is kind of summarizing science and art from both sides. So use this video as a tool to help you remember that timeline for art, and then also use the tools that I'm going to give you in class to be able to recognize different pieces of art.